As spring arrives here in the UK, our native birds are now busily preparing their valiant efforts to continue their species, building nests, securing territory, beginning courtship, or just trying to find enough to eat so that they are strong and fit enough to have a good chance at producing offspring. The bird feeder is a staple in many gardens. Approximately 62% of UK households put out food for birds on a regular or semi-regular basis. Many people derive great joy in watching the birds this attracts, and this can drive engagement in conservation as well as improving one's mental health. But you may have heard calls to stop putting food out for birds. Why? Could it really be doing more harm to nature than good? Hi, I'm Dr. Eleanor Tufnell, an environmental scientist. Unlike some of my videos where there is a clear yes or no answer, this topic is more nuanced. So today I'm going to lay out the pros and cons of feeding birds and hopefully give you the tools to decide for yourself whether or not this is something you wish to do. I will primarily be focusing on UK garden birds, but many of the topics discussed here will be much more broadly applicable. The benefits. Aside from our own enjoyment of watching birds and the knock-on effect on our mental health, what are the benefits of feeding garden birds? Well, we aren't putting nutrients into a pristine natural environment. We live in a world where vast swathes of many birds' natural habitat is now gone. In towns and cities, the parks and private gardens are often the only places where garden birds can find food. In rural areas, much of the land is now managed farmland, which may not provide suitable habitat for many species of birds. As we humans are responsible for this habitat loss, there is an argument that it is also our responsibility to try and to balance that out. And one of the ways that we can do this is by providing food for birds, particularly during lean times of year such as winter, where food is scarce. And this has been effective, at least for some species. One 2019 study found that the use of feeders seemed to boost bird populations in British towns and cities. For example, goldfinches, once rarely seen in gardens, have seen their populations increase and are now regularly visiting UK gardens. Biodiversity. The effects on the biodiversity of garden birds are not all positive, however. Feeding a diverse range of feed, supplying multiple, well-spaced feeders, can increase the range of birds attracted to a garden. However, feeders tend to benefit more aggressive or dominant bird species, such as great tits and blue tits. No, I'm not making those names up. I swear they're real garden birds. Such species are better able to compete for feeders, driving off weaker or more timid species. This means that species such as willow tits and marsh tits, yes, again, these are real birds, have sadly become increasingly scarce in Britain. Blue and great tits tend to fly much further for food, while willow tits tend to nest and feed in roughly the same area, and are thus more resource limited than the more dominant species. This means that not only are blue and great tits more likely to survive harsh winters, they can then bully the willow tits and steal their nesting holes. Blue and great tits, I am so glad I'm not currently monetized on here, because YouTube is not going to like my repeated use of the word tits. These birds are native to the UK. However, bird feeders could also encourage non-native invasive species such as the ring-necked parakeet, which is now widespread across Europe. The aforementioned 2019 study found that there was evidence that the habitual feeding of birds was associated with nation-scale restructuring of bird communities. In plain language, this means some species have benefited, some have suffered, and the dynamics between species may have shifted. Disease. One concerning downside of feeding garden birds is the risk of increased disease transmission. A lot of people's first thought when hearing the words disease and birds is bird flu, but thankfully garden birds are, according to the RSPB, currently considered to be low risk in terms of susceptibility to the virus. However, there are other pathogens that garden birds are high risk for, and one of the best studied ones is trichomonosis, which is Trichomonas gillani, a protozoan parasite which causes lesions to develop in the throat, making it hard or even impossible for the bird to swallow. One way this can be spread is through contaminated food and water, which makes our bird feeders a potential vector. This is not a hypothetical threat either. Greenfinches and chaffinches have seen large declines in their populations due to this disease, as finches are particularly vulnerable to it. The RSPB is so concerned about the possible transmission of disease that they are suspending sales of their bird tables and related products pending the results of two projects, one studying trichomonosis spread relating to bird feeding practices and one on the pros and cons of feeding practices more generally. Feeder hygiene. If you do decide to continue feeding the birds, there are ways to mitigate some of these risks. Good feeder hygiene is essential. cleaning the feeders, tables, bird baths and water dishes regularly is a great start. Advice seems to vary on quite how often this should be done, and germs can and will build up even if you clean them daily, but the British Trust for Ornithology recommends weekly cleans with soapy water or a week's solution of domestic bleach, diluted according to instructions on the bottle. After washing, they should be rinsed with clean water and allowed to air dry. You may wish to wear a mask or dampen the surfaces to reduce the risk of breathing in dust, and it is advised to wear rubber gloves while cleaning, thoroughly washing your hands and forearms afterwards with soap and water. You should also provide fresh drinking water daily, as leaving it to stagnate and build up dirt and excrement can increase disease transmission. Try to find good quality bird food and ideally offer different types of food such as nuts, seeds, fruit and/or insects. You can rotate the position of your feeders around the garden in order to avoid the build-up of food waste beneath it. This is particularly important for species that forage on the ground rather than the feeder. It is also advised to regularly clean the areas under the feeders to remove waste. Ducks. Well, not garden birds, usually. Ducks are popular birds for humans to feed, and as such require their own section here. As a kid, I loved going to feed the ducks, particularly with my grandparents, and I imagine many people have similar nostalgia for the activity. But is it actually good for the ducks? Oh dear, I'm once again going to have to fulfill the role of internet buzzkill, because yes, the way we typically feed ducks can indeed be harmful for them. While garden birds aren't high risk for avian flu, unfortunately ducks are. So encouraging them to congregate together en masse can set them up for disease transmission. And not all habitats are set up to handle the large influx of foul excrement. See my video on dog poop to hear more about some of the dangers of over-fertilisation on an ecosystem. There's also the problem of what to feed ducks. Traditionally we feed them bread. Unfortunately this isn't very good for them. You see, bread is generally low in amino acids, fatty acids and essential vitamins and minerals. Unlike us, ducks don't actually need the carbohydrates. While it varies somewhat between species, ducks' primary food is aquatic invertebrates, which give them the protein they need to survive. Feeding ducks bread can leave them feeling full up, which discourages them from foraging for food that would actually be nutritious for them, which can lead to malnutrition. If bread is left uneaten, particularly if it gets soggy, then it can result in the build-up of mould, which can harm the ducks or other wildlife if consumed. Breadcrumbs left around can also encourage unwanted rodents. If you still want to feed the ducks, however, there are some duck-safe veggies that you can use. Please make sure to chop them up finely so that they aren't a choking hazard for the ducks. These veggies include romaine lettuce, cabbage, spring greens, watercress, courgettes, that's zucchini for my American viewers, broccoli, including both stalks and tops, cucumber, and carrots, ideally cooked as they're easier to eat. You can also include the tops here because those are particularly tasty for ducks. Alternative ways to help garden birds. If you prefer not to put food out for the birds or are looking for additional ways to help garden birds, there are a lot of options. I know I advise this a lot on this channel, but gardening with nature in mind really can make a difference to supporting wildlife. For best effect, prioritising native plants is great. Having areas that are a little unkempt allows insects to thrive, which provides foods for insect-eating birds. Plants that produce lots of seeds, nuts or fruits at different times of year are a fantastic way to feed the birds their natural foods. Trees and shrubs, if your garden can support them, can provide their own mini ecosystem, even if you're confined to miniature species in pots. If your garden can support a pond, even a mini pond, this will really help wildlife out, as places to grab a drink can be hard to come by. Conclusion. So I hope you enjoyed this exploration of the pros and cons of feeding birds. One of the challenges here is that there isn't a clear yes or no to give you. I personally lean towards either not feeding birds or doing so very selectively. But research on the effects of feeding birds is still ongoing, so it's not clear whether we will ultimately learn that doing so causes much more harm than good, or if the answer is to feed in a more selective and nuanced way. If you've enjoyed this video, please help me out by commenting, liking, subscribing, and sharing it with anyone you think might find it interesting. As always, I shall include a nice library of links in the description for anyone who wants to dive into it in more detail. Till next time, thank you for watching.